you just heard, my name is Ashley, and I lead Environmental Defense's campaign to end plastic pollution. You also got a great introduction to my organization. I work for Environmental Defense, which is a national advocacy organization. We are a registered charity. Some people think with a name like Environmental Defense, we are a governmental organization or something, but we're not. We've been around for about 35 years, and we are committed to making the planet a better place for future generations. Now, Hilda tells me this is a very engaged group, so I'm sure many of you have seen images of piles of plastic filling up landfills or littering shorelines, like in this image here. And you've probably read news articles about whales dying with bellies full of plastic bags. Or maybe you've seen that really disturbing video of a turtle with a straw caught in its nose. And perhaps you're aware that it isn't just animals that are ingesting plastic, but there's plastic in the water we drink, the food we eat, and the air we breathe. We are in fact ingesting plastic too. As a matter of fact, there is so much plastic on the planet that plastic is considered to be one of the defining features of this geological time period, also known as the Anthropocene. Anthro being a root word for human, so a geological time period defined by the impact that humans have had on the planet. So the plastic crisis is very real. And in Canada, only about 9% of our plastic waste is recycled. That's actually on par with the global average. About 86% of our waste is sent to landfills, which is the majority of our waste, and 29,000 tons ends up in the environment every year. And one of the biggest contributors to all of this waste is single-use plastics. So these are things like plastic bottles, plastic straws, plastic cups. These are items that we use for days, weeks, maybe months, but they will persist in the environment for decades, if not centuries. The good news is we have seen an increase in concern and action over the past few years, and I'm super excited to say that I had to update this slide today because we've actually had some really interesting announcements come in just the last couple of weeks. About 2 weeks ago, Canada announced it would be banning 6 commonly used single-use plastic items, including straws, cutlery, stir sticks, some takeout containers, plastic 6-pack rings, and grocery bags. And industry and retailers are also starting to take action. Just today, actually, I learned that Tim Hortons is announcing a new pilot program where they will be using a bottle deposit style reusable cup in the GTA. So that would mean if you got your coffee there, you could pay a small deposit and take a refillable to-go cup, which you could then return at another Tim Hortons location to get your money back. This is great because it's moving us away from single use and towards reusable and refillable containers. Unilever, P&G, and Nestle are also exploring new refillable packaging for some of their products. And I, for one, am heartened to see the recent announcements and developments. Early in the pandemic, the US plastic industry was lobbying to remove bans on single-use plastic bags, citing what have now been debunked concerns about hygiene. As a result, many of us in a particularly vulnerable time received the message that plastics are safe and the only way to go in the pandemic. And until very recently, we were actually forced to use disposable grocery bags when we were at the grocery store. In Canada, the Chemistry Industry Association has been using the pandemic to position itself as a hero in the fight against COVID and has been lobbying to block federal action on plastics. So it was a huge win to get the announcement we got a couple weeks ago, because just a few months ago, we thought that would be impossible. The unfortunate reality is that single-use plastic use is up about 300% since the pandemic began. But there is no evidence that single-use plastics are safer. In late June, over 100 doctors, scientists, and health professionals released a statement declaring that disposable items are no safer than clean reusables. First off, they highlight that the virus isn't really thought to spread through surface contact. It's primarily through airborne and face-to-face breathing, coughing, talking moistly, as the Prime Minister said. But secondly, just because something is single use doesn't mean that it is sterile. Any number of people could have touched or coughed on your disposable cutlery or that plastic wrapped, I think that's a zucchini or cucumber in my picture. In the end, the doctors asserted that that reusables are safe to use during the pandemic as long as you wash your bags and cups, as long as you follow basic hygiene. And at the end of the day, we can't allow one crisis, i.e. the pandemic, to give us a free pass to make another one worse. The plastic pollution problem is massive. It's been around for decades prior to the pandemic, and it will continue to be a crisis long after. So what are the solutions? Well, first off, we need to remember that this is about more than just recycling. We cannot recycle our way out of the plastic crisis. For one, recycling systems just aren't able to handle the complexity of materials on the market. And for two, there are limits to the number of times plastic can be recycled before it is so degraded that it needs to be landfilled, which is different from materials like glass and metal, which can be recycled over and over and over again with very little product loss or material loss. What we really need to do is go back to grade school and remember the waste diversion hierarchy. And as you will see, recycling is not at the top of the hierarchy. What we need to do is prioritize avoidance, reduction, reuse, repair long before recycling. Recycling should be a last ditch effort to keep something out of the landfill, not our only attempt. At the root of it, as long as making new plastics from fossil resources is cheap and the costs of collecting and recycling plastics is high, and dumping plastics into the environment is essentially free because no one ends up having to pay a penalty for that, the problem will get worse. Right now, Canada's linear economy throws away about $7.8 billion worth of plastic every year. And what I mean by linear economy is we get oil, we make products, we use them briefly, and then we throw them away. It's a straight line to the landfill. What Canada really needs is strong policies that hold producers responsible, that reduce plastic use overall, and that dramatically increase reuse. These policies would shift us towards something called a circular economy, where products and materials are used over and over and over again, ideally as close to their original function and purpose as possible. So in this slide, you can see a diagram of the circular economy as it relates to plastic from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So it takes a lot of energy and resources to manufacture a new item from new materials. In the circular economy, we want to prioritize reduction, reuse, repair, remanufacturing, and then recycling. So you can see you want to try and prioritize. I've had a pointer right now. If this was in person, I would point out the first ring, maintenance. You want to continue to use a product as much as you can by keeping it in good repair. If you were thinking about plastic used in clothing, for example, that would mean making sure that you follow appropriate laundry instructions so you're not shrinking something and destining it for the landfill sooner than it needs to. After maintaining it as best as you can, you want to reuse it. Maybe you don't need it anymore, but somebody else does. After that, refurbishment. Are there significant overhauls that can be done that don't quite require breaking something down into all of its fundamental like plastic polymers? Can we just take apart some elements and create something else that is new and valuable to society? And after that, the last thing we would want to try to do is recycle it, because recycling is also a very energy intensive and, as I explained earlier, not particularly effective way to manage plastic waste. But how do we get there? So the first step is for Canada to add plastics to something called the Toxic Substance List under a piece of legislation called the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is the law that the federal government has available at its fingertips to regulate plastics. It's actually the same law that the government used to ban microbeads a few years ago. So you might remember those were the tiny little pieces of plastic that were showing up in things like body washes and toothpaste. They were also showing up in our water. And so the government moved quickly to ban microbeads from personal care products, recognizing that they were unnecessary and they were causing harm to the environment. So there's a precedent of using this piece of legislation to deal with issues related to plastic pollution. And the good news is that the federal government actually made the first move to add plastics to the toxic substance list under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act just a couple of weeks ago when it announced its ban list. The federal government has done a comprehensive science assessment, which, surprise, surprise, confirmed that plastics are harmful to animals and are degrading ecosystems. And that justifies adding plastics to the toxic substance list and therefore giving the government the ability to propose regulations that would eliminate plastic waste. Now, one of the regulations to eliminate plastic waste will be the ban on those single-use plastic items that was announced a couple weeks ago. So that would be the ban on plastic carryout or grocery bags, straws and stir sticks, takeout containers made from problematic plastics, six-pack rings, and plastic cutlery. And it's really great to see that the government is taking cues from the European Union, which released its single-use plastic directive last year, and banning a number of the same items. I will say that I think there are some items missing from the list. For example, if they're willing to ban takeout containers, I don't know why they're not also considering banning hot and cold drink cups, which are commonly littered in the environment and incredibly challenging to recycle. Over the next couple of months, we really do need to push the federal government to not only implement the ban on the 6 items that they've already identified, but really to consider expanding that list to other problematic single-use plastic items. Right now, there is a huge disconnect between the people who produce plastic goods and packaging, i.e. companies, and those that manage it, for the most part, municipalities. In most jurisdictions across the country, municipalities are the ones who pay for and operate recycling systems, but companies are the ones inundating the market with complex materials like multi-layer pouches, things that you would get frozen fruit in at the grocery store, and lightweight films, things like saran wrap and other similar kind of flexible plastics. Canada needs to move to make producers the ones that are financially responsible for recycling systems. It's something called extended producer responsibility, and it incentivizes producers to consider a product's end of life and to design them in such a way that they are easier to collect and easier to recycle or reuse. Extended producer responsibility has the potential to push producers to fundamentally redesign their products altogether and to eliminate waste entirely. But making producers responsible only works if governments also set and enforce high recycling targets. So these would be targets that are material specific, for example, requiring that 90% of styrofoam be collected and recycled, or 90% of a certain kind of plastic called HDPE, which is what laundry detergent bottles and shampoo bottles are made from, ensuring that 90% of that material is collected and recycled. The targets really do need to be high though, because they need to be high enough to push producers to make the investments that are required to either fundamentally design the way they offer a product or to make the investments in collection, reuse, and recycling infrastructure. And finally, another regulation that Canada could consider is supporting the recycling industry by establishing recycled content requirements for new products. So basically what this is requiring that anything new that's manufactured have a minimum amount of material from recycled products or recycled content. Right now, with a large supply of subsidized fossil fuels, it's often cheaper for companies to make goods from virgin materials than it is for them to make new goods from recycled materials. So to help stimulate demand for recycled plastics, the government needs to require that plastics producers include a minimum amount of recycled material in all new items. And obviously there's a lot more that Canada could do. There's also a lot that individuals could do, but I kind of left that out because I anticipated getting a lot of questions about that. If you want to learn more, you can check out these 2 reports that are available on our website, Talking Trash, which we released in 2018, and our most recent report, No Time to Waste. And as I said, suspect you'll have lots of questions about individual action, and definitely individuals have a role to play. But I think the role of the individual goes beyond what you can do in terms of the items that you buy or don't buy. It has even more to do with your voice and your power. So send letters to government, sign petitions. When you vote, consider the environment in your voting criteria. As I mentioned earlier, tackling plastic pollution is going to require a collective effort, and it's going to require system change. We all have a role to play, and while we can vote with our dollars, the reality is that not everyone can, and so we need to change the system so sustainability is a given, not a luxury. And in the meantime, I welcome your questions. So thank you for having me.